Hello, Mike Kako. Joe Souza here with Matt Dahlberg. Super stoked because actually picking up from, a concept idea that we had together, which of course is Tone Talk Part 2.
Part 2.
Here we go. Right on. Yeah. So, this brainchild of yours really on concept to seeing it now on this end, which I'm so excited, super stoked.
Oh, I'm just thrilled. Yeah. Last time we talked about tone and all that, and then we grabbed lunch, and I was asking, hey, do you think it'd be possible to make like a line of ukuleles that all use the same back and sides with different just woods on the top to showcase the different tonalities of these amazing woods? And I was thrilled when you guys said yes, and cannot believe how quickly it all came together. And so I've been playing with these now all morning. I played with them a little bit last night, and it's been such a cool experience to really get into the nitty-gritty differences between them, not just from the tone standpoint, which each one has its own flavor and sound, but also from like the player standpoint. I've been a private teacher now for 15 years, and one of the most common questions I get is, what's the right ukulele for me? And, I get to know them as a player, and I make recommendations of different models based on my experiences. But this is a really cool, like, showcasing of how these different woods can affect not just your tone, but, what styles you want to play with as a player. So really excited to sit down with you and talk about these ukes and showcase some differences between the tone and pick your brain a bit about the build process and why certain woods may sound different to certain styles of playing and to certain approaches.
Right. And, at our first tone talk, it was more like the density and some of the specific tones that come with the different densities, right? And growth lines per an inch and some of the subtleties that come with instrument grade wood. But now being able to partner them, in this case, with as level of a playing field as we could start with, right? We all started the back and sides, with the exception of the one koa. With the front, back, and sides, we have all of the instruments built from the same log, sequential cut. This was some Maui koa that we had received from our supplier there. And taking that level playing field and translating that to every instrument to say, okay, we're going to build all of these 8 instruments utilizing the same back and sides, and in as best as we possibly can, keep everything as consistent throughout the build. To then the only difference truly is the soundboard. And what's happening there.
Well, and the back and sides being sequential is such a cool thing because obviously wood has variation, right?
Yes.
And no two pieces of wood are exactly the same. And even with these, the koa will look different, but it's all from the same place. They're sister sets of logs, essentially, right?
Exactly.
Which is really cool, and I think a really unique opportunity to showcase, again, that top wood. It's been really fascinating as I've been playing them, trying to think of what type of students I'd recommend these different ukes to, and then just as myself as a player, sort of how I would approach playing each one of them. And it's funny because when we were recording, I noticed with some ukes I would go a little faster, with some ukes I go a little slower, I'd play a little harder, a little softer, just based on what almost the instrument was telling me to do, which is really fascinating. Now, when we started this, my idea initially was just to do like koa, a spruce, a cedar, and a redwood.
Right.
To which you guys said, nah, let's do 8. So what we got here is we've got 2 different types of redwoods.
Right.
And this one's Sequoia Redwood, I believe.
It's a sequoia.
Right?
They're both sequoias.
Oh,
Just in this case, that's curly Sequoia Redwood in your right hand. And in your left hand is actually a sinker Sequoia Redwood.
So how long is sinker in the water for? 100 years or something like that?
And these logs that basically were so dense and so heavy during those early years of logging, they literally sank to the bottom of the Columbia River.
Crazy.
And sat there pretty much for a century, allowing them to kind of season underwater in a much more controlled, in a different way, environment, cold water.
They look so visually different because of that.
Right.
We'll definitely play them all too, but just to kind of introduce them first.
Yeah.
And then koa, obviously, And then I had the idea for this one when you started suggesting other woods because I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah.
So this one's koa, which is beautiful, and this is maple. Yeah.
Right.
As a top wood with koa back and sides.
Exactly. And in this case, that is not common.
No.
And not only in our factory, I think in the world.
Yeah.
To combine a maple with a koa back inside. And surprisingly,
it's one of my favorites.
Right.
Yeah. I
mean,
love
the
all
tone
of
we
these.
got
But
from it.
when this was actually the first one I played, and I couldn't believe it. It actually very similar tone to koa. But yeah, just a little different. Pretty cool, and really changes it up. And then we've got two different types of spruce, right?
So first is kind of a traditional spruce. I'm going to slide it over to you. And then, of course,
so this one's Sitka
Spruce,
and that's
Adirondack Spruce.
Yeah. Now my personal Kanileʻa is a Sitka. My first one is a Sitka Spruce. And then I have another one that's a Lutz Spruce, which is kind of like almost an in between.
Kind of a hybrid. Yeah, between the two.
Cool.
And of course, Adirondack, for years being kind of the holy grail of tone woods, even though it's generally speaking, it's from the Americas, North America. It has a different tone than, say, traditional Sitka or Lutz. And, the different spruces that are out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is cool.
Crazy. Yeah. And it's remarkable to me how similar so many of these ukuleles sound, and yet how pronounced the differences actually are. It's subtle, but it's very noticeable. Like, you'd think two spruces or two cedars wouldn't sound that different, but they do.
They do.
They
right.
really do.
And even in this case, I mean, these are the same species, Western Red Cedar, and although we've coined the term rainbow cedar, it's still a cedar.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the West Coast.
Yeah.
So basically it's a Western Red Cedar, but showing different characters because it actually comes from Alaska.
I was about to ask, is it Alaskan?
So, higher elevation, different temperature, different seasons to say, which then change the structure of the wood itself.
Yeah, and it smells amazing.
Right. Amazing.
So very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so honestly, when you told me that you were going to do the different, like the two different spruces, the two different cedars, I almost rolled my eyes because I was like, okay, but how different is that really going to be? I mean, I'd assumed the difference between a koa and a redwood would be large, but and so I was again really floored by just how big of a variation that these each had, and again, my playing style kind of changed as I was going through it, and so let's play some of them and
of course
hear a bit. So I think we should start here because this is like the sound, right? When I think of a Kanileʻa ukulele, this is the sound that I envision.
Right.
And it's funny because it's also one of the most different sounding, I think, of all these. I noticed that koa really has these great mids where the way the resonance is, it's nice and complex, but kind of the middle notes kind of poke out. And again, it's just the consistent Kanileʻa sound, right? Yeah. And so with koa, obviously you've worked more with koa than any other wood, right? Why do you continue to work with koa outside of just tradition?
Right. And it'd be easy to land on it's the traditional sound, right? Or it's the sound that we've all kind of grown accustomed to. And even when we were first listening to these instruments, I had to kind of set aside that little part in my heart, which always kind of leans towards koa as like, that's the sound I like. And it's maybe the sound that I'm most familiar with, which in turn leads to, that's the sound I like, right? But then, to really kind of answer your question, I think koa and the reason why it to today is still regarded as the fine ukulele and even guitar tone wood, right, is because of its density. Of course, its beauty. It
looks even better in person. Like, it's crazy.
And I can be a little biased to say that koa is the most beautiful wood in the world. It's gorgeous, but there's a certain tone, and I want to say a certain sweetness. That koa has.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a complex tone. It's it's almost mysterious. I know that's a really weird word to use in this context, but what I mean is when you're playing something like this, you kind of feel like you're discovering these new sounds, and it's a really wonderful way to explore different types of tone, especially if you're coming from a non-koa ukulele, because it just sounds so different.
Right.
Now it's funny because it's the most common sound we hear with this, but if you're not used to it, it's
new.
It's very new and rich. Yeah.
Right.
And so with this being kind of the sound that we're used to, it was funny because the first one of these that I actually ended up playing was the maple, and
the one that we never ever build. You know, I mean, there may be one or two out there, you know, that comes to memory where we combined.
You would not think, as the top wood. I think you told me that you've done it before when you're staining the wood, which makes sense. But this is just natural maple, which has really insane curl to it. But I love this sound, and it's very similar to the koa.
It is. It is.
Is that because of the hardness of the wood comparatively to the other ones?
Yeah, it's dense. You know, maple is very interesting. Koa tends to be a bit more porous, similar to mahogany, whereas maple tends to not have as many pores. And it does have a certain density to it. And although maple has really become big, you know, outside of violins and all string instruments, you know, maple is like one of the primary woods that we use. When we look at the soundboard, it's not the common soundboard.
No.
Yeah, it's usually combined with a spruce or, you know, a softer top to say. But then when we introduced the ilikai and the pohaku models, which of course was an all maple and staining the maple, the sound that we're able to get was like remarkable. You know, like, whoa, this is a tone that we've never really kind of ventured into. Yeah. Although it sounds very koa-like, it still has its own uniquenesses. Yeah. So then building this instrument and combining with a maple top and saying, listen to the tone we're able to get from this. Yeah. And yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, if we listen to like just, I'll play something simple with it, and I'll play on the koa as well. If I play something like... But then if I can hand that to you and do it here.
Right.
Okay, that one's a little brighter, right? You know, this one's a little sweeter, but they're very similar for the tone profiles overall, but really quite neat.
Yeah.
And I think these ukes, you know, especially koa, it's good for anyone that's looking for that classic sound, you know, and if you're wanting to play especially traditional music, traditional ukulele music, it sounds just so good on a koa, and everything sounds good on it, but it's it's really nice for that. One of the things I do in my lessons is I do a lot of chord melody, fingerstyle, instrumental type sounds, and so koa, while I think I have more koa ukes than others. I tend to prefer other tone woods for my own playing because I look for, I guess, a little bit more articulation, a little bit more of a clear sound. And so my main player has been a spruce for a long time. And we've got two spruce ones here that sound kind of like home. Them? I think so.
Okay. Well, you know, we can go into the Sitka first. And the reason why is I would say Sitka in the world of spruce is kind of the most common, the most accessible, maybe is the best way. You know, you see it in guitars. Of course, you see them on ukuleles too. And it's a classic spruce sound.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. And I really love strumming and strumming instrumentals, kind of like I did on those two pieces, or the piece I played earlier on the two. If I play that same thing here. Lot more individual note separation, which isn't necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just a different thing. And so for me, I like that because I feel like I'm in more control over the type of sounds I'm going for, but it loses a little bit of the sweetness and complexity of like the koa, but still a really nice sound. I've also noticed, you know, for myself, I play with nails, and I'm a pretty hard player. Just ask the guys installing a pick guard on my Kanileʻa right now, right? I'm a pretty hard player, and I find that spruce really lets me dig into it quite a bit more than other woods I've tried. And can you explain the reason why a little bit with that? Like, what is it about spruce that lets you just like never gives out?
Right, and I want to say it's dynamic, right? Spruce in itself is a bit more dynamic than koa, maple, and some other tone woods that we're using, even on our project in this case. But I think, to really kind of sum it up into like a phrase would be, spruce has the right balance between stiffness and elasticity, which then in turn has made it such a great tone wood, right? Now, yes, we may get, a little bit more mids out of the koa, and we may get a little bit more maybe bass notes out of the redwood. But with the spruce, having something that's kind of a good foundation to then play multiple styles and dig in when you want to dig in, finger style when you want to finger style,
Yeah, it really, like every note just pops off as you play it. It's very articulate, very, each note is individualistic, which is quite nice. And I have to say, my favorite Kanileʻa, my own personal one, is a Sitka Spruce that I've had now for 9 years, right? And it's opened up so much, and it just sounds so sweet. I think one of my favorite things about recommending Sitka to students is the worst it will ever sound is the first time you play it.
Yeah.
And that's because of two things. Because one is the instrument will open up, right? The wood gets used to being an instrument instead of a log in a forest. The other thing is your playing evolves. You get better as a player. And it's really cool to have that relationship with the instrument where you're growing and the instrument's growing and, really finding these different sounds. So, but I had not played much of the other type of spruce we have until this project. And this one kind of blew me away.
Yeah. I was just going to say, ready to blow your mind. Yeah. I mean, and of course, with respect to Adirondack, it is kind of the holy grail of tone woods. And in many ways, to this day, is one of the most sought after tops for multiple instruments.
So what this sounds like to me is more like my personal ukulele that I've been playing for 9 years than that one does, despite that one having the same wood. It almost sounds like the Adirondack is more open initially, if that makes any sense. But it's absolutely gorgeous.
Right. How do you put words to tone?
That's why we're here, right?
Feeling. And you can hear it. You can hear it undeniably on the clarity.
Really good clarity. And then there's also that complexity to it alongside. Kind of similar to the sweetness of koa a little bit, but it's almost like seasonings, right? Where different seasonings when you're cooking, you can have a seasoning that goes in sweet dishes and salty dishes, and you use different amounts depending on it. And just a little bit can go a long way. It's very similar with this. This wood has a little bit of that sort of sweetness, but it doesn't lose that spruce articulation and ability to really dig in. I mean, like it's really nice.
And while you're doing that, all of these instruments are singing. I mean, I can hear they're all resonating. It's amazing.
When Joe's talking, I just hear the ukes talking back because of the sympathetic vibrations. It's so cool.
It is super cool. Right. You can
that's
feel
crazy.
them.
Like if you just...
Wow.
So
It is so cool.
And so... Yeah, so like for my style as a harder player, one who uses nails, this both these spruces have been such a great fit. The Adirondack has really blown me away as a tone wood, and the Sitka has been very familiar. But
and it is shocking knowing that. I mean, just knowing the history a bit about like this particular piece of Adirondack, knowing that it's been in our factory for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
As kind of a wedge cut, because originally it was laid out to become a violin top. And then, a defect presented itself, but it still allows us as an ukulele maker to resaw, cut it to specific thickness, and then ultimately book match and then create an instrument from it, which in turn, tells a lot, because here's the instrument being built, and it does have an aged, to say older sound at a younger age.
Yeah.
Even comparison to this spruce, which doesn't necessarily have the same amount of age in our factory.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the cool thing is, don't let that scare you off of a younger wood like that, because, again, it opens up so much. And I know that because, again, my favorite Kanileʻa I've ever played is actually, this one, give me more time with this, maybe. But my one that I've had as a partner forever is the Sitka, and it sounds even looks different. It's almost like the color changes a little or something as time goes on.
I wondered why when I came in and I seen on the back of that headstock there was like a MD kind of engraved in there. I was like, I was who's gonna like?
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, I have a few private students who I told about this project, and kind of they'd said, try to find an instrument for me as a player, and so I think I know who this one's probably going to go to.
Wow.
But it's really cool and really special to hear those differences, and we'll come back to this one again as we get back to some other things. But
we're still on our primary investigation.
Yeah, we're
on what we're getting here.
Totally. Yeah. And so let's check out the cedar ukuleles now.
Absolutely. And again, a wonderful tried and true tone wood that we've seen great tonal response from.
I have a cedar Kanileʻa, and I have it strung with low G. So I do lessons. I'll teach both high G and low G.
Right.
I'm more of a high G player myself in my own personal playing, but I understand the appeal and why people love low G. And so when I got the cedar, I kind of tried them both high G for a while, and ultimately decided to do the low G with the cedar, just because. As I mentioned before, I'm a hard player, and when I'm playing high G, I'm even harder player, because I really like to dig in and do the strumming. And I found the cedar gave a sweetness that's very similar to spruce, but it's a little bit more responsive, a little bit sweeter, but it doesn't like you digging in quite as much. And the way I liken it is almost like, if you imagine this like percentage breakdown type thing, I can play the spruce. I play it at like 20% to 100%. And I have to give it like 20% to get the tone. So my nails, my technique, I need to draw the tone a little bit more out of it.
Right.
But with the cedar, it's almost like I play it 0 to 80%. Like I barely need to touch this. I don't need to do nearly as much to draw the tone from it. But at the same time, I can't quite dig in as deeply as I will with a spruce to draw out that tone. And it's not that one's better than the other, it's just for different styles. So with low G, I'm a much more gentle player. I do more finger style, and I just found it to fit. But I think for high G players too, who are a little bit softer of a player than I am, cedar can give you many of the same results of spruce with a little bit less in terms of what you're pulling from it. And if I play that same little piece here now with this. It's sweet. It sounds so sweet. And so what's the similarity between cedar and spruce, and then what's the difference between them?
The smell, of course, is so good. Right? I think the biggest difference that I see as a builder is they both have similar rigidity. They both have similar lateral strength, to say. The cedar tends to have more elasticity. So when we say, if we're holding the workpiece and we're flexing it across the grain, the cedar has more movement in comparison to, say, the spruce. A whole lot more movement in comparison to, say, koa or maple, when we do that. So it's translating now, right? When we look at the finished instrument on what kind of tone we're able to achieve, right? On the elasticity of the wood that we see from before even putting it together.
Yeah, and that elasticity probably means it's easier to have it start vibrating.
Absolutely,
right? And that gives you that really. But we did a whole bunch of sound samples. You can find all that in the links down below, where you can hear House of the Rising Sun played on all 8 ukuleles in 3 different styles, doing thumb picking, as well as finger picking, as well as strumming. And what I found is as I did this exercise, I would immediately change how I approached playing it depending on the uke. I dug in more with the spruces, and with these cedars, I backed off just a bit. It still was more similar than how I played it with like the koa and maple, but just a bit different. And so it's got a lot of that complexity to it.
Right.
While still being very articulate. It's like it's a little bit sweeter of a sound than the spruce.
Right.
And this one is red cedar?
Yeah,
right?
so that's a Western red, kind of a traditional cedar comparatively to, let's say the rainbow cedar there, which in turn, it's the same species. That's the most interesting part. This is a Western red that actually just grows up in Alaska.
Oh, cool.
At a higher elevation, of course, colder. The seasons are different.
Yep.
Which then changes the structure of the wood.
Yeah.
And even though it's the same species, the tone is different.
I love these like almost burnt edges of the rainbow cedar.
With the rainbow cedar.
But that same little thing. Like the notes just pop off the fretboard or as I'm playing. Like it's incredibly responsive, but it still has that ability to dig in. Maybe not as much as the spruce, but it still has that full dynamic range.
And I can hear it how you would hit the ceiling sooner.
Yeah.
To say than you would be able to. Right. Yep. You can hear that kind of overdrive to say.
Yeah. It's not that it's a bad tone. It's just it kind of doesn't fulfill in the same way that, playing this softly compared to some of the other softly will change the tone. And we'll actually showcase that a little later.
Right.
But yeah, there's no one wood that's best. That's as soon as I played through all these, it was like, oh, yeah, there's not one wood to rule them all, right? And it depends on the interest of the player and their style. And not just their style of how they are as a player right now, but what their goals are, where they want to get to. If there's somebody who really wants to play more that soft dynamic finger style, I think cedar is a better fit overall than spruce. If I were doing a lot more of this sort of stuff, I would prefer the cedar. But if I'm doing a lot more of, I prefer a little bit more of the spruce, right? It's kind of a fascinating thing. But yeah, this one is special. Of articulation, but so much resonance.
And you really don't have to attack it.
No, it's much softer for the attack, than the spruce. And so as my style of playing, I kind of back off a bit. Now, all four of these, though, I'm using my nails with pretty heavily because I play with my nails. And a lot of players don't do that. And it's not to say that these type of woods don't work as well with it.
Right.
But this is kind of where I think the redwoods, to me, become a little fascinating because when I started playing the redwoods, we got two different types here. This is the Sequoia Redwood, right? The curly
Sequoia,
redwood.
curly.
Which I think objectively, this is the most interesting looking of these ukuleles.
I think of all, In fact, when I first walked in, and mind you, I seen these instruments going through, right? But I didn't see them all together like this, right? And I first walked in, I said, wow, that looks like the tree. That curl kind of reminded me of that figure that we got from the tree. But of course, it being curly redwood, which in turn, historically may not have been the first choice from the classical guitar builder or the classical instrument maker. They may have not picked a curly redwood as a potential top. Yeah. But here we are, and we've created something that I think is unique, yes, but it has enough to kind of stand on its own. Yeah. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. And, what was funny about this uke is I really changed as a player just trying to work with this one. I noticed that my style and approach, which, again, playing spruce and cedar at home, is a little different with this. So I almost did the instrument a disservice when I started playing with it because I realized I kind of have to change my approach as a player to fit the instrument. And what I notice immediately is the responsiveness of this ukulele and how it almost sounded better when I would use the pads than using the nails.
Right.
Almost.
Yeah.
And I'm a nail player, but like playing with that sort of style was really nice. And so it made me realize I think the redwood is such a perfect fit for anyone who's a more delicate player. So, and somebody who plays softer and wants to really almost, instead of pulling the sound from the ukulele, it's almost like they want to open the floodgate and let the sound come out, if that makes sense. The instrument is, they're letting the instrument sing with just the pads of their fingers instead of necessarily nails. Now, it still sounds great with nails, and all of this is subjective taste. And, I've actually performed with a redwood Kanileʻa in the studio with Aldrine years back.
Right.
I played with one. I loved it. But that same piece now on this one, so it's brighter, I think, than the others.
It is.
And it feels brighter. And what I mean by that is not just tone, but I feel like I don't have to put nearly as much the energy into it to have it vibrate. And why is that? Do you know? I mean, it's...
And I can lead back to, its growth. And in this case, I mean, it's the way that we gauge instrument grade wood with that growth lines per an inch. In this case, the growth lines per an inch is kind of wider to say, which in turn doesn't give it the same lateral strength as something that has tighter grain, but it still has elasticity. So with that combination, we're able to get a tone from it that was kind of uncharted.
Yeah.
Because nobody really builds with curly redwood as a top.
Yeah. It's more similar to these than the koa, I think.
Yes.
But it definitely, it's almost like spruce is you gotta give the most and you get the most type tone, and then cedar is almost in between, and then this is, you can play it softer. And these are generalizations for sure. But
it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, just sitting on the couch to say, and just doing a finger style of playing, you can do.
Yeah, and and you could be a player that plays hard with nails and end up loving the sound more than spruce. That absolutely can happen. But something really cool happened when I was playing this one and then the spruce. Right? Grab the Adirondack. Okay. Yeah. So I don't play with my pads a lot. Right? I'm more of a nail player, but I would say most of my students play with their pads. Having long nails is not most professions you can't necessarily have nails. So I'm going to play just a basic C major scale with just the pad of my thumb. Super quiet. So I'll get close to the mic. But if you listen to this. Okay, now if I do that exact same thing with this ukulele, it sounds like this. You could barely hear it. It like almost doesn't come through. And my preference is this wood to that wood for my style of playing, but that's a great showcase of how that ukulele is better for some players than this one would be based on their technique and style. If you're a soft player who uses the pads of your fingers, something like that redwood can absolutely give it to you. Yeah. And so, and then if I play with the nail, I do it with the redwood.
Right.
I feel like that one sounded better for that, in my opinion. And this is all opinions, but just because of my technique. And so that's fascinating to me because it's a really good showcasing of how the technique, the player, the style affects the tone so much of the instrument.
Big time. And, I just had this thought as you were talking there, like how you had mentioned earlier, like this tone meter, right? Like this gauge that moves, this kind of like the sweet spot. And with respect to the redwood, that sweet spot is kind of softer in volume, softer in playing comparatively to, say, an Adirondack, which, of course, not only does the low end move up, but the top end of the instrument also moves up to say the meter or up the gauge. So you can get more out of it on that upper end.
Yeah. And if we use those percentages, maybe we say each uke can only have 50%, right? Then the spruce might be like 40 to 90, right?
Exactly.
And then this is really like, 0 or like 10,
right.
you know, to 50, and the cedar might be 20 or 30 depending on it, up until 60, 70. Yeah,
right.
And that's neat.
It is,
because your style changes as you do that, and they do still have the textural differences too. Like, so you know, you don't want to just think, oh, I'm a soft player, therefore I want an instrument that has a soft ability to be played.
Right.
All of them your technique can change for and adapt to. So if there's a tonality that you love on one of these, you want to go for that uke for sure.
Of course.
That just blew my mind. And
right.
this isn't the only redwood.
Right.
Here,
that was
right?
one example of a redwood, you know, and then kind of stepping into, and how's this? I'll put the Adirondack back, and then
these are. I think it's almost unfair to compare them in the same way that we did those. Right.
Right. And it's redwood.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same species. It just that instrument or the soundboard went through is entirely different than this piece.
Yeah.
In comparison, where the sinker redwood was, you know, these old redwood logs that through the years of harvesting in one way, where they used the waterways to basically get these big logs from one place to another.
Yeah.
For logistical reasons, now these big logs literally sank to the bottom of the river, the Columbia River, and today we're going back and kind of repurposing them as we bring them up from this underwater seasoning, to say, in this very unique way. And you can see the minerals
and
everything that got absorbed by the color changes, but also the structure of the wood itself.
Yeah, the grain
changes.
looks so different.
Right.
You know, it's less wavy.
Exactly.
And so that same sort of piece played here. So it's similar but very different. And as I mentioned before, I'm more of a high G player than a low G player. But I think this one wants a low G.
Yeah.
I think that there's something about this tonality that it really responds well to the lower notes. Like, I think the C string sounds better on this ukulele than any of the others, and it's pulling me down that direction to wanting that low G.
Yeah.
Something about the overtones and things I just think would sound at its best there. Not to say this doesn't sound like a wonderful high G. I just think if you're a player who's watching this and you're like, man, I'm a low G player, why are they talking high G the whole time? Right. I think this is the fit for sure.
Right.
But it's a really nice sound. It's got so much sustain.
Right. And there's a lot of complexities in the tone.
It's really complex. Yeah.
Right.
The way it rings, especially compared to like the spruce, right? Spruce is such an articulate, almost simple sound, you know, and this one has that complexity.
Right.
But yeah, I want that low B flat right now.
Yeah,
I really think, I think it would sound even better.
And that's what's interesting. You know, like all these instruments could be tuned with a low G.
Absolutely.
And this whole video could be, would be visited. We'd visit each of these instruments differently.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because that redwood would be like, whoa.
I think this would be the clear winner.
Absolutely.
You know, or in the Koa as well, you know. But not to say, again, I use a cedar low G at home, and I love it. And I've tried the cedar on I tried the low G on my spruce as well. And I liked it, but it just wasn't quite the right fit. And that fit isn't just the instrument, it's my style as a player, and then my goals as a player. What do I want to play for style? So,
of course.
But yeah, it's pretty cool, and each one of these ukes sounds so different, and you can hear all of the differences. We made a video that plays all of these ukes again with the same piece of music, played with finger style, with thumb melodic picking, with strumming, each on the different woods, which was really cool. And I've had about as good of a time as I can playing ukuleles today, trying out all these different ukes. But
and it's awesome. Cool. I mean, it's literally like, you know, ukulele heaven has just kind of opened up. Matt has walked into this like brainchild of yours, you know, this thought of, imagine if, you know, we started with this, and from there we created this, and where would this go? And then, you know, being creative in our thoughts allow us to then create these instruments to really like showcase the tone in our best way, to bring words to tone.
Or try to.
Or try to, right, in our best way. But more importantly is to show like, these are the diversities in tone that we can get. And is it one ukulele fits all? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is a matter of, even player mood to tone that basically marries the two of what you're really wanting as a player to then the tone that you're wanting to create, which then, as a performer, that's the tone you're trying to deliver to your audience or your listener. But even for yourself, just sitting at home on the couch, and even if you're just noodling.
Yeah.
And if you're wanting to dig in, then here's the right instrument for you.
Yeah.
Or if you're wanting to just have some soft notes, almost kind of music box like, and you can just play and not have to really dig in, here's the tone wood for you.
Or just pick up all 8 and pick the flavor of the day.
Yeah.
I think another point that I really wanted to make with this was these are all distinctly Kanileʻa sound.
Yes.
And I love that. And so I think that sometimes people become really obsessed about what wood is the uke made out of instead of looking more at what is the builder of the ukulele. Because I've had students early on where they are looking at 2 different instruments and they think that they should have spruce and rosewood or whatever, and they end up getting a company that they don't know or whatever else because it's got that wood combination that they thought was the best one instead of going with maybe a different wood combination with a company that does match their profile or is of a higher quality or whatever else. And so I think when you're looking for instruments, it's really important to find the manufacturer that fits your tone and then allow these different woods to color that the texture. And that's why I love playing Kanileʻa ukuleles, is your tone is so consistent. Every single Kanileʻa ukulele has that distinctly Kanileʻa sound. And it was really cool to hear 8 pretty big variations of that signature tone that you guys have been able to develop over the last, how many years now? 30?
30 years, yeah. I mean,
pretty amazing.
It's funny because the years go by and it almost becomes a blink. And in so many ways, the instruments that we're building today are light years ahead of the instruments that we're coming off of, our bench 30 years ago, right? It's so different, yet so unique in their own way. Yeah. And with all fairness, all of these are brand new. I mean, they all are getting their voice. Yeah.
They're going to open up a lot.
Right.
A lot.
And it's tremendous to kind of see, because it would be fun, in a sense, if we could 10 years from now, saying, hey, here's the video that we did. Yeah. We're trying to recreate that same sound again. And find all the where purchasers. The tone would be. Right. It'd be like, whoa.
Reunion.
Man, the Adirondack opened up. Because here we are, like, what is your favorite? Yeah. It's like a parent trying to pick their favorite child. It's impossible, right?
Well, eventually they'll know, but not yet.
Yeah. But I mean, with respect to that, it's like, what sound do you really love? What sound suits your playing? Yeah. And ultimately having the instrument that supports you through that.
And will allow you to get there too. A lot of times people buy an instrument because it fits their needs right now. Right. But you always want to look to where you want to go and pick that musical partner to help you get there. Absolutely. The number one thing I recommend my students is invest in the best possible instrument you can. Don't do anything foolish financially, but if you can afford a nice instrument, do that, because you'll grow as a player into that instrument. If you buy an instrument that's not as high of quality, its shortcomings become your shortcomings as a player. And then you're looking at, am I making a mistake because I'm doing something wrong, or because the instrument's not facilitating my ability to do that thing well? And so real quick, I really want to bring up, these are all the D series, which I will say, I think they look a little funny, but they sound incredible. And the only reason I don't play a D series Kanileʻa is because in teaching, so often it creates questions when I'm saying, like, put your hand over the sound hole. But that might have to change at some point here, because these sound so good. The offset sound hole, there's something about it that just brings so much more tone. And to go with that, this should be standard on every ukulele forever, the side sound port. I had my first side sound port in an ukulele back in 2009 and on a more beta ukulele. Right. And that opened up everything for me because I realized what you're hearing when I play, because it gives you that projection, it gives you that feedback,
of course,
that the listener would have to the player, which is just awesome. And there's something about the offset sound hole plus that just makes these immediately sound so much more open than other instruments with a traditional sound hole in the middle. I mean, compare them even to my Kanileʻas, and you can notice.
And the features here really is like our Pro Series. So this would be like a D-shaped Pro Series with the side sound port. Of course, the graphite infused nut and saddle, black tusk from Graphtec. Also, it has true reduction. And when we start to look at reduction, or the reduction of mass in this case, and looking how it affects the soundboard across these instruments, right? Where every one of these have that true reduction, which in turn translates to resonance. It translates to tone. So with the side sound port combination of all of these components,
it's just beautiful big sound.
Right. The tone.
And with that true reduction, so that's on the soundboard. Yes. Right. So that's actually removing mass from the soundboard. And that goes in addition to the true bracing system that you use as well, which when you look in here, you can see all these cool diamond shapes and everything that combine strength and weight efficiency, right? And then you also have another feature that's not on these ukuleles, true relief, right? Which is where the edge of this ukulele actually comes down for a little bit more comfort here. And so...
And this project, honestly, wouldn't have facilitated true relief because
of some of the woods, right?
Yeah, because of some of the woods and the ability to bend the soundboard.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, we still tried our best to start with a level playing field, make the only differences, truly the only differences, the tops of the instrument. And this has been such an amazing experiment. I think it's been eye-opening from a player, teacher, who's getting tons of feedback from your students, to a builder who works along with artists, customers, and seeing the differences in tone that we're able to achieve through the different tone woods, and then being able to kind of express in a unique way our findings through all this. Like, hey, my favorite is, and the reason why,
it's pretty cool.
Adirondack Spruce, we kind of landed there and not really going home and studying notes or comparing notes in that way. It was like, play them. What do you think?
Yeah.
Right?
Totally. And exactly. We both ended up really loving the Adirondack and Rainbow Cedar. We both play with nails. Joe's got a big fat thumbnail. So it makes sense that we kind of land on the same, type of things. And then it's funny because with the Sitka, it's like, well, come back in 10 years. And,
and hear the tone of that.
Yeah. And with the Redwoods, it's like, oh, you want to play low G or you want to play softer. And then with the Koa and Maple, if you're wanting that classic sound, and
you can get it.
There's no right or wrong answers here. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun, Matt.
Oh, thank you so much.
I appreciate you. And I appreciate you being thoughtful enough to say, hey, this is what I was thinking. Is it doable? And, from our standpoint, as you know, the answer is yes. We have to just kind of figure it out, right? Yeah. There's a lot of logistics to figure out to ultimately allow us to create the instrument. And then you taking your time, coming back, visiting us again, going through the instruments, and then sharing with your students, with our, customers and the ukulele world, for someone who maybe even just kind of looking into a Kanileʻa and saying, whoa, I love that sound.
Yeah. Yeah. You really get an idea of how the woods can affect the tone in different ways. And this isn't a complete guide. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff we weren't able to cover. And that's just because all of this is so subjective. And so the more you're able to play with these and stuff, the better. And so
here's the curveball, right? What kind of back and sides could we combine? So on that note,
that's what was so exciting is we got that consistency.
Right.
Sometimes people are like, oh, I want this one because it's spruce. It's like, oh, but that's rosewood. That sounds different than the Koa, but we got consistency here. So maybe next time.
Yeah. It'll be another fun project. Well, thank you again, Matt. And thank you everyone for tuning in. It was great talking story. Of course, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments and we look forward to seeing you guys soon. Yeah. So come out, pay us a visit.
Thanks so much.
Aloha.